Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sari Gaur Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Jai. Vanchakapa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sundivya Evacha. Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai. All right, so um, good afternoon, devotees. Hare Krishna. We'll begin with Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, Karma Yoga, text 38. Tu menambia te vani yata daso malena cha yato benabito garbas tata tenedam avitam. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. As fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror is covered by dust, or as the embryo is covered by the womb, the living entity is similarly covered by different degrees of this lust. Okay. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. There are 3 degrees of covering for the living, there are 3 degrees of covering of the living entity by which its pure consciousness is obscured. This covering is but lust under different manifestations, like smoke in the fire, dust on the mirror, and the womb about the embryo. When lust is compared to smoke, it is understood that the fire of the living spark can be a little perceived. In other words, when the living entity exhibits his Krishna consciousness slightly, he may be likened to the fire covered by smoke. Although fire is necessary where there is smoke, there is no overt manifestation of fire in the early stage. This stage is like the beginning of Krishna consciousness. The dust on the mirror refers to a cleaning process of a mirror of the mind by so many spiritual methods. The best process is to chant the holy names of the Lord. Okay, let me get this better. Okay. The embryo covered by the womb is an analogy illustrating a helpless position. For the child in the womb is so helpless that he cannot even move. This stage of living condition can be compared to that of the trees. The trees are also living entities, but they have been put in such a condition of life by such a great exhibition of lust that they are almost void of all consciousness. The covered mirror is compared to the birds and beasts, and the smoke-covered fire is compared to the human being. In the form of a human being, the living entity may revive a little Krishna consciousness, and if he makes further development, the fire of spiritual life can be kindled in the human form of life. By careful handling of the smoke in the fire, fire can be made to blaze. Therefore, the human form of life is a chance for the living entity to escape the entanglement of material existence. In the human form of life, one can conquer the enemy, lust, by cultivation of Krishna consciousness under able guidance. Text 39. Avitam jnanam etena jnanino nitya vairina kamarupena konteya duspira nana duspira nanalena cha. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Thus, the wise living entity's pure consciousness becomes covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and which burns like fire. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. It is said in the Manusmriti that lust cannot be satisfied by any amount of sense enjoyment, just as fire is never extinguished by a constant supply of fuel. In the material world, the center of all activities is sex. And thus, this material world is called Maitunya Agara, or the shackles of sex life. In the ordinary prison house, criminals are kept are kept within bars. Similarly, the criminals who are disobedient to the laws of the Lord are shackled by sex life. Advancement of material civilization on the basis of sense gratification means increasing the duration of the material existence of a living entity. Therefore, this lust is a symbol of ignorance by which the living entity is kept within the material world. While one enjoys sense gratification, it may be that there is some feeling of happiness, but actually, that so called feeling of happiness is the ultimate enemy of the sense enjoyer. Text 40. Indiyani mano buddhi asyade sitana uchate eta vimuhata yasha jnanam abhita dehinam. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. The senses, the mind, and the intelligence are the sitting places of this lust. Through them, lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The enemy has captured different strategic positions in the body of a conditioned soul, and therefore Lord Krishna is giving hints of those places so that one who wants to conquer the enemy may know where he can be found. Mind is the center of all the activities of the senses. And thus, when we hear about sense objects, the mind generally becomes a reservoir of all ideas of sense gratification. And as a result, the mind and the senses become the repositories of lust. Next, the intelligence department becomes the capital of such lustful propensities. Intelligence is the immediate next door neighbor of the spirit soul. Lusty intelligence influences the spirit soul to acquire the false ego and identify itself with matter, and thus with the mind and senses. The spirit soul becomes addicted to enjoying the material senses and mistakes this as true happiness. This false identification of the spirit soul is very nicely explained in Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, chapter 84, text 13. Yashatma Buddhi Kunapetri Datuke, Swadi Kalata Lishiboma Ichtadi, Yateta Buddhi Salile Nakahichit, Janesu Abigesu, Seba Gokara. Your Papa like that a lot. That's why I could go right through it like that. A human being who identifies this body made of three elements with the self, who considers the byproducts of the body to be his kinsman, who considers the land of birth worshipable, and who goes to the place of pilgrimage simply to take a bath rather than meet men of transcendental knowledge there, is considered to be like an ass or a cow. Text 41. Tasmatram Indiyanya down Niyamya Bharatasabha Papmanam Prahajihinam Jnana Vijnana Nashanam. Translation to the Prabhupada. Therefore, O Arjuna, best of the Bharatas, in the very beginning, curb this great symbol of sin, lust, by regulating the senses, and slay this destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The Lord advises Arjuna to regulate the senses from the very beginning, so that he could curb the greatest sinful enemy, lust, which destroys the urge for self-realization and specific knowledge of the self. Jnana refers to knowledge of the self as distinguished from non-self, or in other words, knowledge of the spirit soul, knowledge that the spirit soul is not the body. Vijnana refers to the specific knowledge of the soul's constitutional position and his relationship to the Supreme Soul. It is explained thus in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 9, Text 31. Jnanam paramaguhyam me tad vijnana samambitam. Sa rahasyam tad anjanam cha grihana gaditam maya. The knowledge of the self and supreme self is very confidential and mysterious, but such knowledge and specific realization can be understood if explained with their various aspects by the Lord himself. Bhagavad Gita gives us that general and specific knowledge of the self. The living entities are parts and parcels of the Lord, and therefore they are simply meant to serve the Lord. This consciousness is called Krishna consciousness. So, from the very beginning of life, one has to learn this Krishna consciousness, and thereby one may become fully conscious, fully Krishna conscious, and act accordingly. Lust is the only perverted reflection of the love of God, which is natural for every living entity. But if one is educated in Krishna consciousness from the very beginning, that natural love of God cannot deteriorate into lust. When love of God deteriorates into lust, it is very difficult to return to the normal condition. Nonetheless, Krishna consciousness is so powerful that even a late beginner can become a lover of God by following the regulated principles of devotional service. So, from any stage of life or from the time of understanding its urgency, one can begin regulating the senses in Krishna consciousness, devotional service of the Lord, and turn the lust into love of Godhead, the highest perfectional stage of human life. Text 42. Indriyani parenyahu, indriyebhya paramana, manasastu parabudhir, yobuddhe paratastu sa. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. The working senses are superior to dull matter. Mind is higher than the senses. Intelligence is still higher than the mind, and he, the soul, is even higher than the intelligence. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The senses are different outlets for the activities of lust. Lust is reserved within the body, but it is given vent through the senses. Therefore, the senses are superior to the body as a whole. These outlets are not in use when there is superior consciousness or Krishna consciousness. In Krishna consciousness, the soul makes direct connection with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, the hierarchy of bodily functions as described here ultimately ends in the Supreme Soul. Bodily action means the functions of the senses, and stopping the senses means stopping all bodily actions. But since the mind is active, then even though the body may be silent and at rest, the mind will act, as it does during dreaming. But above the mind is the determination of the intelligence, and above the intelligence is the soul proper. If therefore the soul is directly engaged with the Supreme, naturally all other subordinates, namely the intelligence, mind, and the senses, will be automatically engaged. In the Katha Upanishad, there is a similar passage in which it is said that the objects of sense gratification are superior to the senses, and mind is superior to the sense objects. If therefore the mind is directly engaged in the service of the Lord constantly, then there is no chance that the senses will be engaged in other ways. This mental attitude has already been explained. Param Desva Nivartate. If the mind is engaged in the transcendental service of the Lord, there is no chance of its being engaged in the lower propensities. In the Katha Upanishad, the soul has been described as Mahan, the great. Therefore, the soul is above all, namely the sense objects, the senses, the mind, and the intelligence. Therefore, directly understanding the constitutional position of the soul is the solution of the whole problem. With intelligence, one has to seek out the constitutional position of the soul and then engage the mind always in Krishna consciousness. That solves the whole problem. A neophyte spiritualist is generally advised to keep aloof from the objects of the senses. But aside from that, one has to strengthen the mind by use of intelligence. If by intelligence one engages one's mind in Krishna consciousness by complete surrender unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then automatically the mind becomes stronger. And even though the senses are very strong, like serpents, they will be no more effective than serpents with broken fangs. But even though the soul is the master of the intelligence in the mind, and the senses also, still, senses also, still, unless it is strengthened by association with Krishna and Krishna consciousness, there is every chance of falling down due to the agitated mind. Text 43. Evam buddhi param buddha samstabhya Atmanam atmana jahi shatu mahabahu kamarupam durasadam. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Thus, knowing oneself to be transcendental to the material senses, mind, and intelligence, O mighty armed Arjun, one should steady the mind by deliberate spiritual intelligence, Krishna consciousness, and thus, by spiritual strength, conquer this insatiable enemy known as lust. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. This third chapter of Bhagavad Gita is conclusively directive to Krishna consciousness by knowing oneself as the eternal servitor of the Supreme Personality of Godhead without considering impersonal voidness the ultimate end. In the material existence of life, one is certainly influenced by propensities for lust and desire for dominating the resources of material nature. Desire for overlording and for sense gratification is the greatest enemy of the conditioned soul. But by the strength of Krishna consciousness, one can control the material senses, the mind, and the intelligence. One may not give up work and prescribed duties all of a sudden, but by gradually developing Krishna consciousness, one can be situated in a transcendental position without being influenced by material senses and the mind, by steady intelligence directed towards one's pure identity. This is the sum total of this chapter. In the immature stage of material existence, philosophical speculations and artificial attempts to control the senses by the so-called practice of yogic postures can never help a man towards spiritual life. He must be trained in Krishna consciousness by higher intelligence. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport to the third chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam in the matter of karma yoga, or the discharge of one's prescribed duty in Krishna consciousness. All right, there's a couple of minutes. So, Joanna, what do you want to do? We ended this.
I think we end here. We're on a Friday. We pick up chapter 4 fresh on Monday.
Okay.
A lot of nectar in those purports, I think.
Absolutely.
We could take those extra couple minutes and pull some of the nectar out.
Well, okay, if there are questions, I mean, I'll be willing to, but you can also make comments. Okay, if no questions yet, maybe I should make maybe a couple of comments, if you don't mind.
Please, and then maybe some questions.
Okay. I know you'll be ready for questions. I can see everybody. So I'll let you take about a minute or so. What I got from this was, well, the title is Karma Yoga. So, action and Krishna consciousness. So, Srila Prabhupada brought this whole idea of the material mind, the senses and intelligence, and what dominates what, the mind, then the intelligence, and then ultimately the soul. And the soul is the one proper riding everything. That's how my understanding came from reading this. And then he went to details about when we are doing things in material energy, sense gratification. People think that that's what's going to give happiness, but ultimately that it doesn't. But one has to connect with Krishna consciousness through reading, through the processes. Because we know what the processes are, the 9 processes. And then finally, we will be able to get in a proper position as far as Krishna consciousness goes. So basically, that's what I got from it, if you don't mind. Hare Krishna. So maybe you can comment, and it was at least that's ended 5:20. So now I did that intentionally to put it at 5:20. Okay, so
I think Prabhu wants to
Okay.
comment.
I'm going to make him talk.
I'm waiting for you.
It was so exciting, the aspect of lust and sense gratification. The grosser aspect of our sense gratification is sex life, but it's so widespread, and somehow this has been coming to me a lot lately because I need to hear it. But Srila Prabhupada he answered everything to the problem. We found the problem in, the lust and its sitting places, but Prabhupada's answer was right in the last verse you just read. So my point is that I feel as though the real way to conquer this situation is through good association.
Absolutely.
And now you can speak on that point.
Well, now first, let me commend you that you are on here because we're getting good association from you in the first place. You're a Prabhupada disciple. So we start there, right? Bring it home you first, huh? And all of you guys, I mean, I can't, I apologize for making it a little personal. I mean, I can't thank you guys enough. You're the ones that know Srila Prabhupada personally. We are second generation people. So when you talk about him, and I'll say one thing. In 1998, I was in a Lacho at the time. I was asked to go straighten out the situation with the boys' school at that time. Mulavadika had been asked to vacate the position, and I was called to Gita Nagri. And so, and Alacho has a lot of Srila Prabhupada disciples. And so when I went, there was one thing, I think it was Srila Prabhupada's either appearance or disappearance. I'm not sure at that time, but they had a program. And believe you me, with so much disagreement among the devotees generally, that day when they had to talk about Srila Prabhupada, boy, there was so much unison and so everybody's experience of Srila Prabhupada. I'm just eating it up. So watching so many people, one after another. I mean, second generation people didn't even have time to talk, but I didn't care because I wanted to hear more about Srila Prabhupada. They talked and talked and talked, everybody, including those that fight each other, because a lot of that happens in the Lajwa. But I mean, Mahashinga and all of them, they put everything aside and they talked. Srila Prabhupada is such a uniting force. Such a uniting force. I just wanted to put that in. And he obviously, these purports, what could we understand the Krishna consciousness without Srila Prabhupada talking about these purports? I mean, talking in these purports. We couldn't make sense of it. Just like I said, this last one, knowing, that's the one. So the translation is knowing oneself to be transcendental to the material senses, mind, and intelligence, almighty armed Arjun. So he comes back to the situation with Arjun after he explains, okay, so now Krishna answered. So Arjun, you should steady the mind by deliberate Krishna spiritual intelligence. And then Krishna consciousness, that's what he's talking about. And thus, by spiritual strength, conquer the insatiable enemy known as lust. Now I could just, June sitting on this chariot and, Krishna just looking at him and telling him, you're so confused, but I'll tell you what you're supposed to do. So he gets to this point, this is just the beginning. We got 18 chapters, this is chapter 3, right? And so in the end, as you yourself were saying, the sum total of this chapter, Prabhupada puts it in the purport. In the immature, so I'm reading just the last few sentences there. Okay, I'll go back a little bit because it makes the point. The Papa makes the point. One should not not give up work and prescribed duties all of a sudden. In other words, don't do any knee-jerk anything. You are working. All right, you're working. Then he says, but by gradually developing Krishna consciousness, one can be situated in a transcendental position without being influenced by material senses and the mind. So Srila Prabhupada is saying, yes, we work and we use, we do material things, we use our material mind. Don't give up right away. I'm Krishna conscious, I'm just gonna jump and go to Krishna consciousness. You're still in the material world. What do you think? You have to do some material work still. Okay, so that's how we need to, program our mind. So some of these things that come in our minds, this and that, and you alluded to sex life being the top. It said here, sex life being the topmost of what is called enjoyment, when in fact it's just sense gratification. Still, people are so hooked onto it, and we get affected. The fact of the matter is, whether we like it or not, the things around us are pulling us into motor passion. The billboards do it. The magazines do it. Anything you open you turn your computer on, you cannot avoid something, because now they tell you what you should look at, because as soon as you open the computer, you go to YouTube or something, here are all this stuff that you really didn't want to see, but your mind will pick it up anyway, because the subconscious picks up things. Just like a billboard, I don't care about what's on the billboard. Well, your regular mind doesn't care about it, but the subconscious will pick it up though. And so that thing, the product, this is how it works. So the product that you say you don't want, if you go to the store and you see different brands of the same thing, believe you me, at that time, that thing that you saw on the billboard, that particular brand, you'll be inclined to take it. So it does work, right? So they're just putting all of these things around us. Lust stuff, I won't even bring an example, but something that I saw way back when I was coming in Jet magazine for African Americans, and this woman was advertising hairstyle. But how come you take half their clothes off to advertise their hair? I'm looking at, so that's when I started questioning. This doesn't make any sense. So that little by little, I began to pull away, because it doesn't make any sense. So the point we're making is, as I said, I don't see any reason why they can't use a beautiful woman's beautiful face and just the hair to advertise the hair. Why they go to whole legs and she's wearing, flimsy stuff just to advertise the hair? Because they want us to think lustily. And this is the world we're in now. And so how do we counteract that? Well, as you said, associate with devotees. Devotees are about Krishna consciousness. They remind us of Krishna consciousness. And therefore, we just move in that area. Just like if you want to lose weight, well, now be around people who will help you to lose weight, who are losing weight too, because we're all together. If you do it by yourself, your mind's gonna beat you. You go every 1 week, and then you're back eating, binging again, whoop, bite again, but you get help that way. So in Krishna consciousness, we come to that, and we are all chanting. We are all second initiates, Brahmanas, they do Gayatri, and they're comfortable around each other when they're quiet doing that. Try doing the Gayatri around a kami. He wouldn't know what you mean, or why are you even doing that? So association, as you said, I'm just expanding what you said. It's very, very, very important. It's like we are in our Krishna element, because everybody is about Krishna at that time when we're associating, right? So kamis, it doesn't matter. They're not around us, or even if they see us devotees together, they won't understand what we're doing, but we know what we're doing. And we're moving towards Krishna consciousness. We're getting away from the material energy. So like that, and slowly, we get, as Papa says, gradually, then the mind gets clean, and now we are pure, or almost pure. That's the price of Abadi Sulicham Bhagavata Seva, Bhagavata Uttavasloke, Bhakti Bhavati Naistiki. Little by little, all the time here in Bhagavatam, and serving the devotees. Well, you have to serve an association of devotees. That's who you serve with. And then little by little, the mind gets cleaned up. Bhagavatam connects to Bhagavad Gita. Obviously, you can go back and forth by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.
Riksha Prabhu, thank
Yes.
you. Looks like we have time for one more question.
I was a little long, right? I was excited. Sorry.
That was a nice explanation. Thank you.
Krishna's mercy, Guru's mercy. Any other question?
Can I ask?
Yes, please.
Okay. So text 41 in the purport says here, lust is only the perverted reflection of love of God, which is natural for every living entity. But if one is educated in Krishna consciousness from the very beginning, the natural love of God cannot deteriorate into lust.
What is the question then? Do you want to comment on it or what? I don't know.
Yes.
Okay.
What does it
wait.
From the beginning?
Were you surprised when Srila Prabhupada said it was a natural thing, lust, at the beginning? Did that surprise you? Because it surprised me too. I just want to see, when in Krishna consciousness, we feel like, well, we're supposed to stay away from lust. And then the Bhagavad Acharya said, well, that's the way it is in the beginning. In other words, admit it. We are lusty from the beginning. Admit it. As a kami, we are all situated and literally steeped in lust. but little by little, we can be pulled from that through Krishna consciousness. I know it's 5:30 already. That's why I stopped here.
Well, my question is really it
Okay.
says, but if one is educated in Krishna consciousness from the very beginning,
Yeah.
that
Oh.
that the natural love of God cannot deteriorate into lust. What do you mean by the very beginning? Since childhood, or what is it? What is it he means when he says very beginning?
I'm thinking the same way. See, there are some of us that came into Krishna consciousness.
Okay.
And then there were others that were born into Krishna consciousness. There is So those who were born into Krishna consciousness, when they were in the womb, they were hearing they were hearing bhajans and lectures and kirtans. Well, I wasn't born like that. I was just born a Catholic. And it came into a Catholic family. So I never got to hear anything about Shiva Prabhupada until I was almost 40 years old. But there are some people, that we gave birth to that came straight into Krishna consciousness, right from the womb. Yeah, so they were born into no meat eating, no intoxication, house with no intoxication, no meat eating, no gambling. So that was there. So they were, right from the beginning, steeped in Krishna consciousness. And it was just, even playing was all Krishna consciousness. Even dancing was kirtan dancing, the kids dance kirtan. So right from the beginning, yeah, and so that's the distinction. That's the way I'm seeing it. Hare Krishna.
Okay. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Glory to the Prabhupada.
Thank you so much, Parikshit Prabhu, for leading us in this Friday afternoon edition of our Bhagavad Gita Happy Hour. Thank you to all the devotees for tuning in. And we completed chapter 3 today. So we're moving right along very nicely. We really hope that everybody's following. And want to also mention that we have a couple things coming up this weekend that we want to make sure everyone knows about. The first is we have our Japa Reform class on Saturday morning. So Japa is the sacred practice of chanting the holy name on beads. And this is a class where we go over different techniques and mentalities for improving our chanting. Currently, we're studying a book by Sachidandana Maharaj called Nam Rahasya, which gives a lot of very nice gems about keys on how to chant nicer. So that's Saturday morning. The class itself starts about 8 o'clock, but before that we chant. And actually every morning we begin chanting our japa at 6:30. So anybody that wants to join us for the chanting early and then the class at 8 o'clock, please join us for that. The other thing is this Sunday, as for our Sunday feast class, we have a special guest, Her Grace Mother Rukmini Devidasi. She's a senior disciple of Srila Prabhupada, and a person who gives very nice, very informative and very inspirational lectures and talks on Krishna consciousness. She's the wife of our GBC, Anuttama Prabhu, and she's also the mother of the great Kirtaniya Gauravani Prabhu. We're extremely happy to have her, and she's very accomplished in and of herself. And please tune in and invite your friends as well. This will be a very special opportunity to hear from her. So that's Sunday at 5 o'clock on the same Zoom channel. Please tune in. We hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and we hope to see you at some point throughout the weekend on our calls. And we will resume our Bhagavad Gita reading starting at chapter 4 on Monday with His Vajra Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Glory to the Prabhupada.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Bol.
Hare Krishna.
Monday. Keep on Sunday, I'm sorry.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Glory to the Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna,
Thank you.
Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna. Glory
Thank
to
you.
the Prabhupada. Jai. Thank you for allowing me to do the little service here.
Hare
Krishna.
Any